Okay, we appreciate Professor Lyman's discussion, fascinating historical adventure, and we also appreciate that he helped us catch up in time. We're running late, and we thank the next speaker as well, who has given up half of his drasha, so we appreciate that as well. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce someone who was with the OU for many years and is now charting his own adventure in kashrus. Mir Chemi is coming out with a book on kashrus. He's written extensively in many magazines about kashrus. It's a pleasure for me to introduce Rabbi Zusha Blech, and he will speak on anomalies of Simoni kashrus in animals.
Bershus, the Rabbanim, all the illustrious people who came to this conference. I also am very pleased to have given over some of my time to people who have preceded me and people who will follow. I'm sure I've enjoyed this tremendously, as I'm sure you have also. The short topic that I wanted to discuss today, called anomalies of kashrus, is that even though in the Chumash it lists basically by behemoths only 2 simoni kashrus, which are mali, gera, mafrise, parsa, and issues which have been discussed at length, the Gemara in Chulin and Daf Notes adds one more, actually several simonim, but one on which we're going to focus. The Gemara discusses Rav Chist, a Ton Rabbanan. It goes and explains. Rav Chista says if somebody's traveling in the forest or in the wilderness, and he comes upon an animal whose hooves have been removed, and he wants to know if the animal's kosher or not, so he can look and see if he has teeth. And if it has upper teeth, as we'll see, then it's not going to be a kosher animal. If it has no upper teeth, it's a kosher animal. The Gemara then continues with 2 more other similar simonim that are not mentioned in Chumash. It says if you've come upon an animal whose teeth have been removed, but you can inspect its hooves. If you see, I'll get to it in a moment. If you see that it has cloven hooves, and it's kosher as long as actually, I missed something at the beginning, but I'll get back to it in a moment. You see if it has cloven hooves, and you see it's not a chazer, you can eat it. Otherwise, you cannot eat it. And it says a third one: if you find an animal and it has neither hooves nor teeth, and you can inspect the meat, and if the muscle tone is in certain directions, you can eat it. Otherwise, not. Going back to the first one, which says if you inspect the animal, it has no upper teeth. So the Gemara goes into a discussion, and it says, well, if it has no upper teeth, that means you for sure it's going to be a kosher animal. And the Gemara says you can be sure as long as you recognize that it's not a ben gomel. And then the end of the Gemara says the following klal, that kosher animals lack upper incisors. And now I'm very indebted to Rabbi Zivotofsky. He's brought the skull of a cow, and as you can see, it's full of molars, but this is the upper jaw, there are no teeth, and there never were any teeth. What really is up there is a sort of a leathery plate, and when the cow eats, the lower jaw has incisors, and it's a very efficient lawnmower. It bites off the grass, and I didn't get to that yet. Yeah, I'll get to that in a moment. The wrong one? The point is the same. There were no upper teeth. There was there's a leathery patch on the top, and the lower teeth bite up, and they snip off the grass, and then the animal swallows it. It's then maligera and chews it again and uses the hind teeth. Whereas non-kosher animals, such as a horse or a mule, and this I can show you, they have upper incisors, and the lower jaw also has incisors. So when it bites off the grass, it actually slices it with 2 sets of teeth. And the Gemara says that that's a siman muvhak of an animal that's not kosher. The Gemara says, what about a camel? A camel also lacks these upper teeth. The Gemara says, gomel nivi islay. Nivi, 2 lashonos in the Gemara, means either that there are canines or other teeth that come out over here, or that there are pieces of gum that stick out that function also to aid it in its chewing, and it's also a reason to consider a teeth that it's not kosher. The Gemara says, what about a ben gomel? And a ben gomel, the Gemara says, a baby gomel doesn't have these teeth yet, so you have to be a bucky and a ben gomel. So the bottom line is, if you see an animal and you see that it doesn't have any hooves, if you check its teeth and you know it's not a ben gomel and it doesn't have any upper teeth, it's fine. The problem that's raised and has been raised recently in Eretz Yisrael was that they seem to have found certain animals which are generally considered to be ruminants, and by all definitions they are, such as an elk, that have upper canines. It means they have teeth on the top, and everybody assumes that they're kosher. And it's come to the attention of certain Rabbanim in Eretz Yisrael, and it went to the office of the Rishon LeZion in Eretz Yisrael, and there were tshuvas written back and forth. Some wanted to, before getting into what the lomdus is back and forth, we have to understand that this siman isn't mentioned anywhere in Chazal. As a matter of fact, to make an assumption that because it has upper teeth is a siman muvik that it's not kosher is not based upon Rav Chisda's rule at all. Rav Chisda's rule was if you're traveling and you see an animal that has no upper teeth, aside from the Ben Gomel, you can assume it's kosher. That does not necessarily presuppose that if it did have teeth, it's not kosher. You don't see that basically from the Gemara. But from the lashon of the Gemara, as it continues explaining Rav Chisda, you do see it. Because the Gemara says, Im ein lo shinaim lamala biyodua shehitara, and im lav biyodua shehi tameya. So the Gemara, according to our girsa, the Rambam has this girsa, the Gemara says biyodua shehi tameya. And that leaves us in a problem, because what are we going to do with an elk? Truth is, I don't have an teretz for an elk, but I wanted to bring up another animal which raises another question. The discussion amongst the Poskim in Eretz Yisrael went into the following lumdus. The Gemara says the machlok is what nivi meant. According to the first lashon, the way the Shulchan Aruch and Paskins, it means it is the gums. And then there's another das deya that says it means teeth. So some wanted to say that Maker didn't be Paskin, it's only gums. If it has teeth, it can be kosher, which is a very difficult approach, and it's basically been rejected, at least by the office of the chief rabbinate. The animal that I wanted to discuss, and maybe this will give us a way to understand this whole concept of the teeth, is an animal called a chevrotain. A chevrotain is otherwise known as a mouse deer. It is neither a mouse, it is neither a deer. And the word chev means a goat. A chevrotain is a diminutive of a goat, and it's not a goat either. It's a very, as we want to use the term, a modern bria. It's an animal that has split hooves. It, according scientifically, is called a ruminant. It's maligera. And it has upper teeth. It has tusks. So it depends how we look at this. If we look at it as maligera, mafris parsa, we assume it's kosher. If we're going to go with the siman, that upper teeth are depositive, which means they are a clear indication that an animal is not kosher, you assume it's not kosher. I've seen people who say it's a double pasha, the chevrotain should be considered kosher. Why not? The problem is, what are you going to do with this Gemara? And the bigger question would be, if it would be a din that it's just the mitzias. For example, the second raya from the Gemara is that if your hooves are cut off, if the mouth is cut off and the hooves are there, and you see if it's split hooves, and it's not a pig, it's kosher. We're not creating a new siman. We're just following the assumption that there are no non-kosher animals with split hooves other than a pig. So we can say if we see it split hooves, it's not a pig, we know it's kosher. There's no chiddush over here. There's no creation of a new siman. If we go to the last siman, which was the warp and the woof of the flesh and the hind quarter of the animal, we're not creating a siman. We're just saying an assumption over here that if it follows this pattern, we know it's kosher because the other simanim would be there. But over here, the Gemara seems to establish that the teeth themselves create a siman. Where do we get such a concept as the teeth themselves create a siman? What I wanted to bring a raya from was something Rav Shamshon Fuller Hirsch discusses. When the Gemara discusses, when the pasuk discusses rather male geira, all the Rishonim go discuss where did this word geira come from. So Rashi has two lashonos. One lashon comes from the word goron, one comes from the lashon of things moving. But Rav Shamshon Fuller Hirsch has a different approach entirely. He says that the word maligera comes from the word megera. Megera is a scythe or a sickle, which means an instrument which slices grass down, not through the action of scissors, not through things that are pressing one against the other, but by merely cutting, which would fit according to the idea that a kosher animal only has teeth in the bottom and not on the top. So if we learn the way Rav Shamshon Fuller Hirsch wants to learn, that lower teeth and not upper teeth are depositive in the sense because they're an indication of what is truly a maligera. The fact that scientifically we find other animals that we will call ruminants, but not technically a maligera. And if we take that approach, we can then say with the Dover Pashut really, that a chevrotain would not be a kosher animal. It's a maligera and it's a mafris parsa. It doesn't make any difference because technically it's not a maligera. And the proof a little bit to this approach would be from another anatomical anomaly, if you wish, in the digestive system of the chevrotain. A chevrotain in contradistinction to all other ruminants except for one, which we'll get to in a moment, has a three-chambered stomach, which means instead of having the rumen, the reticulum, the omasum, and the abomasum, it skips the omasum. All cows, all sheep, all deer, all animals which we commonly consider to be kosher, including a giraffe, all have four-chambered stomachs. The only other animal that does not have a four-chambered stomach, that we consider a ruminant, the pashtus, is a camel, and a llama, which maybe is considered a camel. And that is the animal that the Gemara brings into the discussion that it has upper teeth. So what I was thinking was, it's quite possible that the fact that the camel has upper teeth is indicative of the fact that this type of maligera is not a halachic maligera. Yes, the pasuk calls it a maligera, but the pasuk is saying that this type of maligera does not qualify. And if that's not so strange, because you have to say the same lamdas when you get to the shavan and the arnevis. The shavan and the arnevis, whatever animals they are, if they're a hyrax, they're a rabbit, they're a hare, they're anything else, they're clearly not ruminants in the traditional concept of a ruminant that we understand by a cow and a sheep. Yet the Torah calls them a maligera. And what most Mefarshim explain is, yes, we consider them a maligera to some extent, but the Torah is being megala to you that this is not a full maligera. Were it a full maligera, you would have other problems because there are other animals that exhibit these qualifications, and the Torah does not list them. So what seems to be is that the Torah is indicating to you what seems to be a maligera isn't really a maligera. If you want to carry that all the way to a camel, you can say the same thing, because the Gemara calls the teeth indication, according to Risham Shmuel Fuller Hirsch, a deficiency in the description of a maligera. If we carry that further, we'll carry it through the shevertain, and it sort of proves itself, because the shevertain is also a three-stomach animal. It's not a four-stomach animal. Unfortunately, this analogy will not carry through and help us with the elk, because the elk is a four-chambered stomach. But in terms of discussing what is considered a maligera, what is not, the jury still should be out. Ultimately, of course, we have the Chazon Ish, who says we shouldn't eat animals for which we don't have a Mesora anyway. And when it comes to a sheverton, I would certainly defer to that animal. Shkar.
Rabbi Yehuda Kravitz, who will give a short, brief overview on Nicker. And Rabbi Kravitz has been in charge for the last number of years on the meat industry, and he has the meat industry. He has, with a very careful eye on the highest standards of kashrus. We have been very fortunate to have him at the helm of the meat industry. And unfortunately for us at the OU, but I guess fortunate for Miami, he has accepted the position of rabbinic administrator of the Vada Kashrus of Miami-Dade. That's the new KM Kosher Miami. So we gave a plug for the new Kosher KM Miami Kashrus. And it's a great kavod for me to introduce my Yidid, Harav Yehuda Kravitz Shlita.
Shus, Rabbi Belsky, Rabbi Genak, Moranan, Rabbanim, Rabbi Isai, ladies and gentlemen. This part of the session deals with Nicker, and what better than to start with the Ramah. One line of the Ramah and how much lies in that. The Seder Nicker Elo Achalavim Tzorich Riyam in Harboki B'Nicker. To understand, to know the actuality of how to do Nicker, one has to actually see it from a baki in Nicker, someone who is professional in it. V'ef shelavaya heitev b'sefer, and it's impossible to explain it correctly, that you should know how to do it b'sefer, in writing. This is what the Ramah states. And when we learn it, we think, the Ramah says that we can't know it from the Sefer alone, you have to see it. But there's a lot that lies in here. And I want to give you, for the few moments that they've allowed me, a brief overview. The Yisoid of Amunah, the Yisoid of Mesora, the Yisoid of Mesora lies in this halacha, in the way it was given, in the Amunah's Chachamim in which you received it, in which you saw it. That's how you have to give it over further. we find that by Har Sinai, by Maimir Har Sinai, the Rabboni Shalom, the Medrash brings, when he taught all these halachas to Moshe Rabbeinu, Chazal tell us, Tofas HaKadosh Baruch Hu kol min v'min. The Rabboni Shalom took, in actuality, every one of these minim, the Heraloila Moshe, and he showed it to Moshe Rabbeinu, v'omalei, and he told him, Ze ochal v'ze lo ta'ochal. This you eat, this you don't eat. And even the intricate parts of it, Omer Abavo, Kemin Golgoyle Shaleish, Heralai Karish Bochel, Moshe Tachas Kise Akovit Shaloi, V'omalai, Inikov Akrum Shalmoyach Afilu Kosher, and this is what it looks like. Moshe Rabbeinu in turn, likewise, showed it to Klal Yisrael thereafter. Tanya Reb Chia says, V'lamet shoyim Moshe oiches b'chayu umar lahem Yisrael. How do we know that Moshe Rabbeinu actually took it? Other halachas he said Valpeh. But when it came to these halachas of Tumah v'Tahira, the halachas, Lahavdil ben Atome v'Ator, by Chai and Neufis, and how to do Nikor, and etc., and all the intricate halachas, Zoi Sachaya Shatoicho, Zoi Sloi Toichu, says Chazal. Ezeh To'ochlu Mikol Asher B'mayim, Zu Tome v'Zu Eine Tumah. Moshe Rabbeinu showed it to him. And just like the Rabboni Shalom showed it to Moshe, and from then on, from Sinai on, since it was given in the format of, look, this is what it looks like, in turn Moshe Rabbeinu gave it to Klal Yisrael in that format, and that's why the Ramah comes and tells us, La Halacha, that from a Sefer, Efsha, Levi hate of the Sefer, but you have to go and learn it from a Baki, and he should be able to actually show it to you. It's interesting in the history we find in the Kuzri, in Perik Shlish and Perik Revi'i, he mentions many times there that all these halachas had deep meanings, and there was great chokhmah in it, which have been lost to Klal Yisrael. The Yechidi Skula, he says, in those times, in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, and even after the Chorban he brings down, after Chorban by Yisrishin, they understood and they knew, the Yechidi Skula in those days still understood and knew the reasons why all these halachas prevailed. To us, it's not understandable. Why is this tar? Why is this tameh? Why is this acceptable? Why is that not acceptable? But they knew in that day and age the reasons for it. And the Kuzri brings down that it was given, even written down. They would explain it from door to door, and they would write it down by Sefer. But because of the tzaras of the Golas that Klal Yisrael went under, Beino Amim, so he says, B'shloi ta'omas aleinu, and Klal Yisrael lost through that filter of Golos, Klal Yisrael lost that Mesora that was given from Chochem to Chochem in that. So that's why when it came, he says, to writing down the Gemara, it was nitnu what the Hamoinam needs. Rak lichim is never. V'lei motzvem evlahoris ktanos u'remozois the Gemara b'midrashois. So what we have now in our day and age, the Gemara, the Shas in front of us, is only a remez, he says, to all the intricacies and the depth that lied within the Chokhmah, that lied in the reasons that lied within why these halachas are so and so. But we no longer have it. We have in our day and age the Mesora, to accept what we see. And that has to be given Beriya, with seeing it, and B'Sefer is not enough. And in truth, we see it's the first Mishnah in Mesechtes Avos, Moshe Kibel Torah Sinai, and the Chazal ask, why Sinai? Moshe Kibel Torah HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Mesora Lishor. We're talking about people from who received it. So the Maral says that Sinai is an intricate part of Mesora. Why? From then on we see, because it says Moshe Kibel Torah Sinai, it doesn't say Moshe Kibel Torah HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's to tell us that every Mesora needs a Mokim. The Mesora for Moshe needed a Mokim. It was Sinai. And from then on, every Mesora in Klal Yisrael, where do you have this Mesora from? In this city, they acted and they did such and such in this city. A Mesora needs a Mokim. Moshe Kibel Torah Sinai. And afterwards, Mesora Lishua. So he asks, so why doesn't it say that the Moshe Kibel Yeshua Kibel Moshe? What does it say? Because he's telling us another part of Mesora. The second part of Mesora, after we have a place, we need a person. We need a muscle. We need who's giving over. And the din is that if someone is a Chacham Be'ir, and a Chacham in his time, like a Moshe Rabbeinu, from him you can accept that it's an actual, acceptable Mesora, and not everyone can come and just say what he wants, that this is a Mesora, and according to his ideas, this is correct or incorrect. Mesora in Klal Yisrael needs Mokoim, and it needs a mensch. It needs a person, Adam Godel. The Ramos sets this for Husker L'Doiris from his time on, that the Seder Nikor Eila Chalavin Tzorch Riyam in Aboki B'Nikor, we have to see it from it, the Efshel Avar hate of the Sefer. In the early 1800s, Rabbi Yisai, and then we're coming now down to the Mesora in our day and age. The early 1800s, when Yidden, the Jewish population, came to Eretz Yisrael in that Kufa, in Yerushalayim, the Yishuv HaYoshan in Yerushalayim was made of the Sfardim. And they had the Botei Shchita under their jurisdiction. And therefore the Nikor that they did, they were more Bedayik, their Mesora, and Dam, that means the Gidon. Whereas the Ashkenazim, we had our Mesora more Bedayik and the Chalev. But the Yishuv HaYosef in Yerushalayim, since the Shchitas, the Botei Shchita at that time was by the Roiv, which were the Svadisha community. So the Nikor done at that Kufa in Yerushalayim were more Bedayik on the Gidim, on the Dam. In Tveria and in Tzvas, which was more populated by Ashkenazim, and they had their Shchita there at that time there, they were more makbid on the Chalev, as they did in Eastern Europe until World War II. In the times, in the later 1800s, 1878, Baruch, Rav Shmuel Leib Diskin, Rav Shmuel Shaland were in Eretz Yisrael, and then there was already a larger populace of Ashkenazim living in Yerushalayim, and they opened up Botei Shchita under the auspices of the Ashkenazi community as well. Then there was a need of how will we do the Nikor? Will we do the Nikor the way they were used to doing it in Tzfas and Tveria and in Eastern Europe? That means in Poland and Lithuania and Hungary and Romania, etc. Or will, which is different to what the Sfardim were doing up till then, according to their Mesora. And they decided they shouldn't moitzilaz on the what they ate till now, because if they change the derech hanikra and say let's do it differently now, it would mean that what we were eating till now wasn't really 100% accurate or acceptable according to the way they should have really done. In order not to be moitzilaz, they decided that their Botei Shchita would also accept to do in Yerushalayim the derech hanikra like the Sfardim. And kamat ad yom hazeh, that's the way it remained. In Yerushalayim, the Nikor is done one way, and in Tzfas and Tveria and Bnei Brak and other places, not just over there, Botei Shchita nowadays, it's done differently. In America, after the war, 60 years ago, the Oile from Eastern Europe that came here and became the Menachrim started doing it more in the ways of Eastern Europe, the way the Derech Ashkenazim. In the last Kufa, the last 25 to 30 years, most of the Menachrim that come from Eretz Yisrael. And due to this, that they're mostly coming from Eretz Yisrael, so that is where they've been trained. Some have been trained in Yerushalayim, and they do it in one way. Some have been trained in the other places of Eretz Yisrael, Tzfas, Tveria, Pesach Tikveh, which was a big place for the training of Nikor, of Ashkenazi, one of the best Menachrim in the world was trained. And Bnei Brak, etc., do it differently. And those that were trained there come here, and they do it their way. That's many times I get phone calls from different butchers across the country saying, how come this is coming this way, this is coming that way? So I ask him right away, from which Botei Shchita are you getting your meat? And he tells me, because I know the Menachah there was trained here, and the Menachah there was trained in a different place. But it's not that one was wrong and one is right. It's all Mesora. They're both right, and each one has his Mesora. The last years, the OU, the Helmut Rabbi Genak, has instructed us to try to put together a conformed way that should be makobel by everyone. And we've led the way a bit, talking to the Botei Shchita, that they should all do it more or less the same way and come to a consensus of that everyone should be happy with it. And Baruch Hashem, slowly that is transpiring time by time. It's interesting to note that prior to coming here, I received this morning a phone call from Eretz Yisrael, from the Rosh Yeshiva Ponevezh, Rav Leizer Kahneman, and I was telling him the topic I was going to be talking about. He says, you could tell them that in Lita, he heard once from his grandfather, the Ponevezh Rav, that in Lita, they also had a problem with Menachrim and training of Menachrim. So they decided, the Vada Rabbanim of Lita decided that Menachem will have to be trained by the Vada Rabbanim. But most Rabbanim didn't know Nicker. It was the butchers more than Katsovim that knew Nicker. So they trained 3 Rabbanim in Nicker, and one of them was the Ponevizherov. And these 3 Rabbanim would give out a Tudah. They would give out a certificate to people in Lita who wanted to be Menachem, that you are an acceptable Menachem. And Bemela and all the Shtetlach in Lithuania, the Rabbanim knew when you hired a Menachem, the Menachem needed a Tudah, a certificate of acceptance by the Vada Rabbanim of Lita, and then he was accepted to do Nicker. So Baruch Hashem, this is something which the OU has been contemplating doing also for a while, and the Mirza Hashem, we hope to one day to be able to fulfill this as well here in America, to be able to have a system. We had a few years ago a training program at the OU, which we had 125 people came to see a one-day, of course a one-day can't learn Nicker, but a one-day session of Nicker training, just to give people a taste of what it's all about. And the 30 people afterwards came over to me and said they were interested in being trained to Nicker, and we sent them then to Rabbi Ashkenazi to start training people slowly. So Baruch Hashem, the OU stands at the forefront in every aspect of meetings, things like Nicker and training of Nicker, where we're taking the lead in trying to make sure that Kalal Yisrael has Menakrim for days to come. Now we have Rabbi Ashkenazi, who's one of the best Shochtim, Menakrim, a multi-talented person when it comes to Shrita, who will give us a live presentation of all the parts, some of the parts, which we do Nicker. We don't do Nicker Acharayim here in America, that's accepted. I even have tshuvas from Rav Kratzkel Abramsky, who adamantly put out letters saying we shouldn't do Acharayim. It's so, the Surim that could come out of it is so harbor, so strong, so it's better only do the 4 quarters. Rabbi Ashkenazi will now start the presentation. Thank you.
We're going to ask also Rav Agon Rabbi Yisrael Belsky Shlita will explain to us what exactly Rav Ashkenazi is doing.
ברשוס, דה חושב הרבונים ודאיו, דה לא עם דה תוירה, דה מחזיק את תוירה, זוך כמם בשטאטב זן, איינט, lernen עשר זכן, auf die Kashrus. Kesedre, de friede Kesedre von der Woche haben wir gelernt, in Kedoshim Tiyu, ki Kodesh ani Hashem Elokecha. Stellen die Frage, wo ist der Pshat Kedoshim Tiyu, aluschen Osid, da steht Kedoshim Hayu, und Zan, der Mesilische Shorim, sagt das Kedusher, du darfst an Amatune von Gott. Na was? Ein Mensch darf machen, wie es Kaddish denn. Und macht a Steidles, will sein, wie es Kaddish denn, wie es Kedoshim. Gibt ihm Amatune von Gott. A fahre Zieg, rechen Tag, der Kibo da bei ihm, in Shabbos, wo sagt, Matune toi, wo jeschle, bis gut, wie Shabbos moi. Und ich bringt da auf ein paar Mal in der Teure von Kedoshim Tiyu, von überall, was steht dort, gab Achilles, Asurois, gab andere Sachen, bringt da auf dem Kedoshim Tiyu. Man darf wissen, man nimmt daran den Meul bevor, man nimmt daran den Meul, zu sehen, dass Lausanne mit Erscher, mit aller Erscher, muss man darf haben. Ich kann mir vorstellen, ich weiß, ein größer Eulam kennt mich, den ganzen, wo jetzt ein größer Eulam kennt mich nicht. Ich habe gelernt, Nico, bei der größten Benakrem von Pesach Tikva, Ruven Kalfus, in Meislich, aber Meislich, über die Dinge wie in der Rosh Benakrem in Pesach Tikva, gelernt bei sie 3 Jahre, mit der Halben, aber gelernt, Nico, Chelik Archoiri und Chelik Kidmi. Es hat nicht genommen, es ist gewesen sehr schwer. Sie kommen bei der Nacht, man gearbeitet bei der Nacht von 2 Segel, von 1 Segel bis 5 Segel Fartuk. Man gedacht, die ganze arbeiten, und sie nehmen die Chaluke, und man darf wissen, dass nicht Gimken tut, man hat genommen ein Stück Fleisch, hat nicht gesucht, von wo nicht das. Sie sind von der Tschech, von dem Kaf, von dem Schädel, von der alle 7 Chaluke, was sie durch die Heilige Kachoiri, hat nicht Tute gegeben. Kurz, was man darf, wenn Ackert an der alle Chele, wenn die Gide Adam, wo sie verrannen, aber man gedacht kennen geht Aloches. Und man gedacht kennen dem Lemeinse, den Nico. Und du da kennst, du hast Achmen Akrem, wo es früher der Mann bei Kravitz, wo sie kennen die Meluche, ob kein tut, das haben sie nicht in der Hand. Mit davon anführen, ich hoffe, mit anführen, als jeder Benaker, jeder, was er gibt, achtung auf Nico, Losuma Tude, im Wissen, aber Tude, was er wird auf Schritte, am Tude, für Rabodim, für Intergechos, mit davon Tude, für Menakrem, Intergechos, mit davon Menakrem, als mit Brüchen gewesen, seien da Luche, seile Mainze, also Tude, kann ein paar suchen, wo sie gibt Menaker gewesen, wo sie nicht Menaker gewesen. Okay, jetzt haben wir gehen weisen, ich gebringt da du zwei Sachen, kann ich kein schleppen gesagt, die ganze Beime. Wir gebringt zwei Sachen, was du ist wichtig, was du joinik von Gelef do reise, von Gelef Keres. Und du darf von die de plate, was du joinik von Gelef Keres, und mit davon Kilo. Bis zurück mit 25 Jahren, was mal lachen nicht gekommen, hatten du gemacht nach Kilo nach der Auge nehmen. Da eure Elioin, mit nicht macht kein Kilo jetzt nach Arwasen, oder wie wir machen jetzt Israel die Kilo mit den Masbersan Rabbi Belski auf Englisch aber jetzt do will wasen de Heilig, das ist de Plate, de Mesora Chuse, das ist de Brisket, und du de Plate. Okay, de Skirt aufnehmen, und darf man nachher sein. Ja, de Skirt.
Okay. Rabbi say, I'll translate. The skirt is the diaphragm. I'm sure most people sitting here know about the diaphragm and don't know about the skirt. The diaphragm, which separates the chest cavity from the abdominal cavity, is covered on both sides by a membrane. It's covered on the lung and heart side by a membrane, and on the stomach and intestinal side it's also covered by a membrane. This is the remainder of the skirt, the part of the diaphragm. The diaphragm naturally goes across the whole animal, but this is what's left over here. As you can see, this part is membrane. On the inside, you can see the glossy membrane, and this is the part that faces the abdominal side, the stomach and the intestines. It also is covered by membrane. Now, the halacha is that you're supposed to peel the membrane off the stomach side, and the minig is not only to peel it off the stomach side, but to scrape all white material down to the red, down to the meat itself on the side of the stomach. And again, the Rama says the minig is not only that, but to pull off the membrane from the inside as well, because one could be confused. So he's going to pull off the membrane from the inside, but that's the heart and lung side, but from the stomach side, he'll pull off the membrane, and he'll also scrape down the white material till he hits the meat. That's what's done by every diaphragm skirt, or like the butchers call it and tell the consumer tenderloin meat. That's what it's called in the kitchen.
That's the chrome.
The inside is part of the peritoneum.
That's the chrome, which is reared on the keres. And do the tenderloin, do zwei tenderloin. A chitzoin and a pnimi.
Okay.
Das ist ein tenderloin. Du darfst mal aufnehmen, du darfst da alle Marikesse reinmachen, und du siehst das zweite Tenderlein, das Pnimi.
This is meat that's part of the abdominal wall. It's not part of the diaphragm, but it's the same type of meat. When you eat it, it tastes pretty much the same. And this is called the chelik hapnimi of the skirt. also called tenderloin, and we remove the fat and the membrane that covers that meat as well.
Du findest was so mois, was mit da mufen drive, mufen die Bricke macht ein Kilo. Das ist wer bringt da oben 3.
Yeah. What he's doing now is to remove some of the ribs. The mice is like this. There are 13 ribs in the animal. So when we separate the hindquarters from the forequarters, we cut next to the 13th rib and leave the 13th rib with the chelak ha'achoiri, with the back, with all the chelak and the anosha and so on. And we don't take the 13th rib into our butchering place. We discard that. But the 13th rib and the 12th and the 11th and even the 10th, they curve back and they go all the way up. So as you can see on yourself, if you put your finger where the ribs meet, the ribs start all the way down and they curve up till the bottom of the sternum, which is high up on the body. So because of that, you cut off the latter ribs, which are sticking out over the navel meat.
In order mit du was? The tenderloin. The navel. Yeah.
This is the abdominal wall, was the navel meat, the meat which goes all the way down to the navel of the animal. And he'll show us how he takes out a very important vein from there and removes that and some of the fat. But before that, he cut off the bones that were covering it because they were the back ribs that curved towards the front.
Aufmachen du den Vein. Dafür bin ich Chef, darf ich im Back.
Just to stop for
Regel.
Yeah.
Will was?
Warte a second.
You know.
It'll take me a half a minute. There's a major blood vessel. There's actually a vein and an artery that go together. They're two blood vessels, but they feel as one large blood vessel. It goes all the way from the neck of the animal all the way to the back. That blood vessel runs through the brisket and through the plate meat. The abdominal wall, which has the navel in it, is called the plate meat. That major blood vessel has to be removed. It's a little bit different when you remove it from the brisket. The brisket, by the way, is the central plate of meat which covers the area between the front legs. That's the famous brisket, which is a very popular cut of meat. In that brisket, and the Tzvi is going to show us how to remove it. It's one of the skills of an expert menachir, to take out the vein, which they go from here, going all the way back, and then it goes through the plate meat, through the abdominal walls. The same vein that just continues back to the stomach. Yid hayoret menachot.
Hose.
No? Yeah? Rabbi Lach. Yankee. What's the technical name for that blood?
No lebt Agit, Adam, lebt Arup Findu, wie Zarup Odo enten. Jetzt machen wir Kiluf, die ganze Place, in Odem gehen wir Arup enten, und macht allerdings Kiel.
There you are. Right.
Der Damu do do do.
The other.
Der Damu do do. Du seht der Damu do, wie lebt da Arup.
Right. Here, show him a little bit. In that piece of meat, which is tucked in between the brisket bone and the ribs, is that piece of that vein, that blood vessel goes straight through. You remove the whole meat. The meat is worthless. It can't be used. The meat contains the
Yeah.
Okay, now he'll show us how he takes the very same meat and is cutting it out of the plate.
Markilov, the only place was the Keres Rirtun. Dem place, weil der Keres du gefinnst auf der Reihe. Die ist im 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, du gefinnst auf der Reihe. Aber die Kpnim geht daran, du, und bei dem Tarbesch, du gefinnst auf der Keres. Der Keres ist, du ist joinig von Chelewa Keres. Darf man move in alle places. Du de gute die Kafle, sie du de 5 gute die Kafle, wo sie gehen darauf. Du ist so geschnitten, aber es du in der Bericht.
Just a second, a minute.
Ja. Da ist er mal.
1 second. Two different chochmas. One is in action.
Okay. Ich kann nicht gewiss, okay.
The thing is like this. One, a little over. Fine, good. the plate, which is the abdominal muscle, or the navel, or whatever other name you want to call it, that has that same blood vessel running through it, and it has to be removed. We said that before, but there's something very important concerning that blood vessel. That we consider any white, fatty material above the blood vessel, towards the ribs, we consider that to be yoinik min ha'chelev, or chelev haksoliv mamish, anything above the blood vessel. Anything below that, so we're not concerned with that's a small animal and there's very little to be gained. So people usually don't touch with it, they just cut it off legamri. But in the larger animals, there's quite a bit of meat there, and they're very careful just to remove the white and to preserve the rest of the meat.
Jetzt gehen wir nach auf dem Gute die Kafle, was gewinnt auch bei usually by animal is cutting 12 ribs. By calves is just 11 or 10 ribs.
Right. As I say, just very briefly, this is one of the things that when you walk into a butchering place, you could tell whether a good job is being done or not. One of the most difficult things to do in Nikur. It happens to be like this. There are 13 ribs, as I said before. The 13th rib is always cut away. And as Rabbi Ashkenazi just pointed out, in the case of a small calf, they'll cut away not just the 13th, but the 12th, sometimes the 11th.
11,
because
usually
it's
normal.
too difficult to pachke with it. You don't have that heavy ribeye meat which is behind it, which is so important to preserve in a larger animal. Now, yeah, you could, but right, you'll spend 15 minutes getting yourself to 50 cents worth of meat. So, what we have to do with the 10th, 11th, and 12th ribs, starting from the spine all the way up near the top, is to cut away like a little V-cut right next to the rib itself. You put the knife, and you have to take that knife and cut away a little vertical cut next to the bone, and then take the knife about 1/4 of an inch further and cut an angled cut towards the first one, and you remove like a V-shaped channel next to the 12th, 11th, and 10th rib. And there are 2 strings that go through that little V-shaped piece of meat. One is a red one and one is a white one. The red one is we remove because it's chutei dam. The white one we remove because it's possibly chutei chelev. Rashi says that the chelev ha'ukitz is not just by the tail, but by the ribs as well. So the halacha of removing that piece of meat is found both in Siman Samach Daled and in Siman Samach Hey. Siman Samach Daled, which is Hilchas Chelev, and Samach Hey, which is Hilchas Dam. We remove both what we call a blut order and a chelev order. In that, it's very important to remove that piece. A skilled menaka removes it and doesn't damage the meat, and the meat looks perfect. So there are people who take a knife and slash, they ruin the meat, and the 2 other are still left behind. I've seen this dozens of times. So you're going to see a perfect job. But now, here, I have to add something. In the bottom part, these 3 gidim continue, the white and the red of the 10th, 11th, and 12th. They continue all the way down. Now, here's the important part. They continue down to the end of the rib, and they go further. They go into that piece of what do you call a diaphragm meat, which is now on the table, that inner diaphragm, not a diaphragm, that inner tenderloin. I'm sorry. They go all the way down. Those three sets of gidin go all the way down, past the bone and into the tenderloin meat itself. So Rav Hirsch is going to show us.
You can see it.
Right. He's going to show us how it's removed from the meat and how it's removed from the bone. We don't have the 11th and 12th rib over there, so we're only going to have the 10th when it comes to the bone. Shimon, that's the way it is, huh? Huh? Yeah, good. That's right.
Dem 12. Baum du darfst nicht also reinmachen, bei dem 12. Baum, bei der Kettel, darf dem ersten Baum einen ganzen, completely reinmachen, wenn alle Schummes.
It's between the 12th and the 13th. Rabbi Ashkenazi just pointed out something to us. We don't have it here that we could see it, but in a large animal, you cut next to the 13th rib, and the little bit of meat, an inch of meat between the 12th and the 13th, very valuable meat. But we're machmir when we're menakir, we scrape off all the white material on top of that bone, and the little finger-like projection that goes to the back, we take that out too. Many people take that out. And now, he's continuing the nikur.
Finde ich spannend, wo sie läuft, wenn der Tarpisch, der ganze Pool, darf man mit Acker sein. Der Tarpisch, wo sie läuft, du geht daran, da wo da, der Mamschir geht daran, du in ein wenig.
Okay, now he's going to do, now that we finished with the plate and took out everything from the ribs and the meat that follows the ribs, ist das rausgenommen von the...
Ja, du darf man...
Now
No.
he's going to go to the brisket itself. The brisket itself, which many times you see without any bone at all. He's going to take out a couple of blood vessels right there in the beginning of the brisket. Between the first and second, that's actually, there are two layers to the brisket. And these chutei dama between the first and second.
Du geht der Damus, geht daran, du darf man rausnehmen, und du stickelt mit der Maus, und nimmt es auf. Du hast immer gerne die Brisket.
That's it. Usually by cattle, the brisket is always separated from the plate, and there's a separate nikud onto it. In a small calf, it's just brought together. There we go.
Aber ja, du ist, der Gabi hat's los, ist genick am Hemd auf dem Krumm.
Yeah.
Darf nicht, eben lasst dem, darf du soll nicht aufnehmen, aber du soll mach leukes Pesachtik für Jerusalem, der Gabi, dem Krumm. Zum darf man aufnehmen, a viele melasten.
Right.
Pesachtik, was machen wir gewesen, wir darf man aufnehmen, und los Jan.
And he just pointed out that's one of the things that Rabbi Kravitz mentioned before about how they do differently in Yerushalayim. And hopefully, I'd like to point out, just parenthetically, that there's no one in America who does that Yerushalayim minig. There shouldn't be. And if there's someone who says that he does it, so it has to be stopped, and it's not going to continue, because no one in America should be doing the Yerushalayim
Nikur.
and it's an excuse sometimes when someone is caught when they didn't do things right. But Rabbi Ashkenazi just showed us is he took this skirt, this is the diaphragm, the tenderloin, the skirt, got a couple of names.
Dus is de tire,
Right.
tenderloin, dus is
He pulled off.
de billige tenderloin, dus moet nog
Yeah.
met een berg.
Right. He pulled off the inside membrane. That even though the inside membrane could be left if the piece of meat, if the skirt is left hanging on the animal, sometimes the calf meat, especially in by lambs, the skirt is left hanging on the animal. They don't just take it off. It's not big enough to sell separately and to be cooked separately. It's cooked with the front. And if it's left hanging, al pi din, you're allowed to leave the membrane on the long part portion of the skirt. But he took it off because in Pesach Tikva, where he learned and all over, they're already noyeg to take it off, even though al pi din, if it's left hanging on. Besides, he didn't leave it hanging on, so it's...
Ja, aber hier da alle Mari Kesef, mit alle Kruh, was ist joinig von Uchele Vakeres, darf man nicht aufnehmen.
Now he's going to take off down to the meat. Mari Kesef means a silver appearance. It's going to be under the membrane and scraped off down to the meat. There you are. Okay.
Da alle Mari Kesef, und alle das auch geht auf dem Krumm, aufnehmen, oder dann clean, wenn die Einsat, den ganzen clean.
He scraped off from this side, and it's completely clean. Some scraped a little, very thin membrane over here, but it's not necessary. And to the other side, there is material left, because that's only the long hard side. And
Just the chrome.
That's right. Perfect.
This is the second, this is the Pnimi.
That's the inner tenderloin.
Von Einsat auf den ganzen Keule sein.
There you are.
Du de 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, einmal du 5, de gute die Kafle, was geht da an.
Those, he pointed out it's very difficult. On a larger piece, it's easier to recognize, but on a small, thin piece from a calf, it's more difficult. That's where the veins and nerves, and nerves, actually, the white string, by the way, is a nerve. We say it's yoinik min achelev, but the veins and the nerve, the red and the white chuten that run through the ribs, they run through the inner tenderloin as well, and they have to be removed. There, Rav C is removing them all.
Die mij gaan zijn. Ze kunnen zijn. Glas het dus die gili dus 1, 2 do. Glas gaat die glas gebal zijn move. Dus je gaat dus die Udo der Udo.
Right.
Ze gaat daarop 1. Du gaat dat het tweede.
Right, here's the string. It's very interesting. Because here, the cells, I have it in my fingers. The camera got a shot of it here. This is that very same chutz that we're talking about, that runs through this inner tenderloin meat. Right, it's going to take it out, and the customer is going to eat this. We'll have it out by the time it gets into the kitchen.
Es do a day, goed die kafte, do a day, se da reise. Am da was mir vom.
The Gemara says that chutei ukitz is yoinik min achelev, and Rashi says that it could go into the ribs. We take it out. There's a tremendous difference, by the way. If it's only als dam, all you have to do with the evidence to just cut through it here and there. But if it's als chelev, that's not good enough. It has to be removed legamri, and we paskin that it has to be removed legamri. But the evidence got mixed up with Simon Lahakel because Rav Yishanim don't learn like that. Okay? What? It's a real nerve. It's really a nerve.
Okay.
Okay.
Dus de tank van a calves van 22 weeks. Ze kijkt eens dat wie a gasse. We macht es dat fett. 350 Pfund wird in 2018, 20 weeks.
Yeah, that's a large tongue.
Du dat treverbeen.
Right. There's a V-shaped bone over here that goes from the jaw into the tongue. Now we call the trefne bendel, like a wishbone. It comes together, and there's a single bone down in the middle, and that helps to wag the tongue. You know, a human being has that too, so you got to be careful with that bone.
The knife, okay.
It's found though not in your day, but in the Sefer Chavetz Chaim. Now to be careful with it. Sure, because if you make tzli and you soil with the chaylev and dam,
Du kent hier
you
wazen,
got to remove the chutei dam before you make tzli. You
Du
open
hat,
up the chutei dam l'chol ha'tochis.
de goede dam kent hier wazen, du.
Oh,
Frische Red kann es herausziehen.
right. This is extremely important, Rabbi say. You'll find
Beide
if you
Sachen.
stand right near the shechita, as the behemoth, a few minutes after the behemoth geschochten and it's still warm, you could cut off the tongue and remove these veins without damaging the tongue. You just cut off the tip, make a little cut, and take the thing and pull it out. There's 4 blood vessels in the tongue, 2 on the right and 2 on the left. But now that it's cold and it's been around for a long time, it's a lot more difficult to remove them. It's warm, yeah, they slide it right out, the whole thing.
Whole thing.
You have to remove a little bit, chop off the tip of the tongue, because sometimes they're like held on by the tip, but otherwise they go right out. This is a blood vessel. Some people leave the blood vessels, 2 of the blood vessels, one on the right, one on the left in. They call it the pumping vein, and they fill it with pickled water.
Bis not noch im Spitz, wenn ich.
Look at it.
Du nehmt noch auf de Dreh von der Bein, was du. Und das mit dem raus, weil der lost ist.
The bone plus some surrounding tissue, and that's called miktam moz. Then it has to be removed because it's a davar nimus. When you eat, it's not supposed to even to eat things that are.
Amol du hast stamp. The stamp auf dem Keule was on the stamp, weil das ist sehr important.
It's self-explanatory. The stamp, the government stamp, or kosher, whatever it is, inspected by. Same one who inspected your shirts when you inspect the number 23. Yeah, you take it off because it's usually put on. It's burnt in. See? Oh,
Du kennen sehen, de
yeah, there you got it. Yeah, you could see quite a large vein, and you could see some of the blood in it as well. I don't know, it doesn't. Just hold it right there. Right there? Right, good, you hold it. Near the microphone won't help us, huh? Well, you see the red in the vein? You see that? Yeah.
I love to see it now. I say all of them to size of the night.
Oh, I feel it's down to here?
Yeah.
All the way down. Loshen medaber. No. I lost it. Loshen medaber is good. Well. Yeah. I've stood in a Schlachthaus and seen in 2-3 seconds the veins come out. All 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, if you do it right away.
Du,
It saves
ze
a
doet,
ton of work.
ze doet 2, 1 aus der Darm und 1 aus dem Maus. Das ist der Darm, du gehst an der Darm. Can't see it over here, you see? The Darm oder?
Sometimes they leave the order, and if you can't catch it all, and you don't want to it breaks, and you don't want to chop up the whole tongue, so you could just make slices all through the tongue, so that during the malicha, the blood will drain out. Well, a lot of the mois is lymph nodes through the shoulder. Those are the main things that we take out from the mois. Oh, and Svi is much more skilled at this business than myself. You'll notice he got out the whole, right? You could tell who's the professional menaker and who's not. What?
Okay.
No. It's nothing. This is a blood vessel. But for tefillin, they'll take the Achilles tendon in the bottom of the leg, above the arcum, the Achilles tendon, okay, and dry it, and then beat it and pound it, and it separates into long, thin fibers, and then spin the fibers like you spin any fiber.
Nu, wir darf machen Löcher, die alle Plätze, du, lassen.
Right.
Da.
Right. You just stabbing the tongue all over, so that any blood vessel that was left, if there's a little piece that's left, it'll surely be cut and it'll drain during the malicha. There you got it.
Okay. Dan mag je maar die al links. Dat is... Verkast de stijl en ik valt daarop en hij maar moet 2 vent, 3 vent. Thank you.
Okay, yeah.
Wat? Die?
I don't have any
Dit is van Donnerstag. Geneva. Gib es weg. Gib es weg. Van de arbeiter, van de guy.
Thank you, Rabbi Ashkenazi. Just 1 second, please. Okay, we're going to start. No one has basically had a chance to ask questions during the day, so here is your chance, and we will ask Rabbi Belsky Shalita to answer, Mitcham, all the questions that you would like to pose. Now, we asked just Rabbi Belsky if he could repeat.
No, dat gaat
Rabbi
niet
Belsky
zo.
to repeat the
That's
question.
in the back. That's in the
before
front.
answer.
No.
Yeah, what is it?
Badir, yeah.
Yeah.
That's it in the garbage.
Nobody
That's I
on
want
the
to give
goyim
somebody.
the nikur. The goyim could make
Yeah.
the nikur from beginning to end, and the mashgiach has to check every single piece that he was menakir. Not one little drop by Yisoima. You could, if in a place where the goyim do the work and nobody checks on them, maybe after 1 or 2 days they'll be doing it perfectly, and after 3 or 4, you'll be finding half the stuff left on the animal. You can't be simach. In places there gets one expert menakir, and there could be 10 goyim, but the expert menakir has to check every single piece from top to bottom.
Rabbi Belsky, could
Yeah.
you tell us about Nikur V'Acharayim? If somebody wants to do it, is it Keneged the Minig? Is it just because it's very labor intensive that we don't do it? What's the mokum?
Let me explain to you. Nikur acharayim by behemoths as opposed to chayas. So it requires the nikur, very careful nikur of 3 separate categories of isser. One is the chaylev, and one is the dam, and one is the gid hanoshe, and the gid hanoshe is very complex. It includes the gid with the knois, and the shuman hagid, and the gid hachitzoin, which is not so clear exactly what the gid hachitzoin is, but we remove a tremendous amount. It takes a lot of skill, but the truth is that what makes it even more difficult is because already for hundreds of years we not only remove the gid with everything, but we also are mechatet not only by digging into the aver, but by cutting open the cut of meat and removing a whole network of nerves, or in one case there's actually blood vessels and not nerves, which we consider extensions of the gid. So because of that, when we finish being menakir, the acharayim, the meat is hardly economically viable. The beautiful sirloin cuts and the porterhouse steak and the other stuff that should command so much money in the Goyish market doesn't look nice anymore. Like Chazal tell us that if you take a chaticha ruya l'skabe and you slice it, so it's a kilkel and a loss right on the spot because it doesn't look so nice anymore. And if it's cut up, and which it has to happen when we make a proper nikur acharayim. Now, in Europe, there were kehillas where there was a minig not to be menakir the acharayim. There were kehillas where the minig was to be menakir the acharayim. And as mefursim and achroinim, the Noda Yehuda brings that in his kehillah in Prague, in the large city, there was a minig to be menakir the acharayim. In America, it's one of the things, we have the minig of Europe and the Eastern European countries, but over here, the countries themselves were divided into localities and into cities where there was a minig and there wasn't a minig, and it's extremely difficult or impossible to establish a minig in America. L'maise, nobody was ever really menakir acharayim of behemoths in America. There was never a market for it, and they were never trained and skilled people. In Eretz Yisrael, where they do it, they consider it to be, after it's already done and all that work goes into it, non-mahadrin, kashrus. They have different categories of meat there and everything in Eretz Yisrael, mahadrin and non-mahadrin. They consider it to be non-mahadrin.
Do I understand that if an animal can mate successfully and naturally with a kosher animal, that it is kosher and does not need a Mesora?
I wasn't here during the day when these things were discussed, so I don't know what was said and what was not said. What is clear from the Gemara is that one of the tests to show if an animal is kosher is if it could mate successfully and produce regular, normal offspring from a kosher animal. And that would be a very telling point in the case of the Brahmin cow, which is mated with the Angus, which produces that famous Brangus cattle, which was in the forefront of the kashrus concerns recently.
Could I?
Yeah, let me just backtrack for 1 second. Reb Moshe Zatzal had said that there is no beer on a minig of being menakir the acharayim in America. We really have no chlora beer, and we'll never have one. And if somebody wants to import meat, and he wants to eat it for himself, he'll never be able to sell it and make a business out of it. He could probably do it. But it's never been an issue because of the reasons that I said before. Now, when it comes to the Mesoras on animals, that's been a major problem. The Chazon Ish held that you have to have a Mesora on behemoths and chayas, and others held that you don't have to have a Mesora on behemoths and chayas, and I'm sure it was discussed adequately in the morning. And the OU policy on these things was also discussed. But yes, there is definitely a milah in the fact that the Brahmin species can mate easily and successfully with the Angus, the regularly accepted cattle, and that's one of the reasons that we never were mafakbek in the acceptability of these species here. Yeah.
Approximately how long does it take to excise the Gid Hanasha from an average-sized cow?
Well, Tzvi, you could answer us, because I excise Gid Hanoshas from deer, but it's much more easy because the minig, it seems clear from many Mekoros that you don't go deeply into the muscle when you excise the Gid Hanosha from deer. What? Yeah. 2 hours from a cow. Tzvi says that from a large cow it takes 2 hours. And I think he once told me, if I'm not making a mistake, that there's a special bonus given to the menakir for being menakir the Gid Hanosha. So it's probably a little more costly than the regular nikir as well. So it adds 2 hours of bonus pay to the There's no difference. Al pidin, there's no difference between a behem and a chaya. It's possible that the extra minhogim in chumras that grew up around the nikur of the acharayim of a behema came about because of the chaylev. I don't know, but the old menakrim in Poland were unanimously in agreement that they were menakir and mechatet and took out everything. They get achitzon, they get apnimi, and the shumen, and the knoikness, but and mechatet into the meat. But to go deeply inside to take out the tes and the tzaddik and all these, this they didn't do to the chayas. 100% clear as to why. It's not easy to say, because in Shulchan Aruch it says that there's no chiluk between the nikr of a chaya and a behema. But don't forget that these extra chumras are also not mentioned in Shulchan Aruch. They're a Mesora, but they're not mentioned in Halacha. Yeah.
Rabbi, mad cow disease,
Oh.
can you speak about that generally? And specifically, are cattle allowed to be fed meat byproducts like they do in Europe, which has been attributed as being one of the causes?
Let me tell you, as far as mad cow disease goes, the data is not fully in whether it's shaykh to have mad cow disease in kosher animals, but so far, Baruch Hashem, in every moment is a Haidor Shevach Vaidor to the Rebbeinu Shalom. We haven't had any mad cow disease coming out of kosher animals, and it's possible that one of the reasons is because of all these extra minhogim in Nikur. You see, the experience shows that even by infected animals, but the prions, or whatever they're called, which contain the infectious and the disastrous material that causes this mad cow disease, they are found in and near the central nervous system of the animal. And we keep far away from that central nervous system. The Gid HaNosh, by the way, is part of the central nervous system. And when we menakir the Chute de Kafla, we also cut nerves which are usually the dangerous ones, never enter the kosher market. But I'm not going to attempt to make a gzeira that this will be so. We have to always have a tefillah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should protect us weiter and weiter. Another Mesora comes from the Minig HaMokim. Minig HaMokim means that doir achar doir, in this place it's accepted that this species has a Mesora being kosher. Another Mesora that the Shach brings from the Marshal is that even though the halacha is that we don't say Kach Omar Li Rabbi Chocham, but if the Chachmei Ho'ir give over, that they were Mekabel from their Rabbeim, and they know from their experience as Chachmei HaTorah that this is a min that's acceptable, so we could also use that as a Mesora. Now, this leads to certain complications, but let's start. Rabbi Tzayed is very difficult. The halacha is that for a person to be qualified Tzayed, it's not enough that he be like Esav, Ish Yedei Tzayed, Ish Sodeh, but he has to be a person who's Boki, B'chol, Chof Dalad Oifes Tameim, and the Leminayim. So he has to know all the different Oifes Tameim, and it's pretty clear that we don't have this Rabbi Tzayed around today and for a number of generations. So a Mesora that one could say, someone taught me and he gave it to me over, is extremely difficult to come by. A Mesora of Mekaimis is the best that we have today, because we don't even have the Chachomim who could just tell us with their experience as Chachma in the Chachma Yisrael. It's just not available to us today, the knowledge of Chochmas HaTorah, which makes a person roy to give over, that this is the Mesora and so on. What we are generally kaveya is the Minig HaMokim. The Minig HaMokim is something which leads us into, I'm sure it was spoken about today, by the way, and I hope I'm not repetitive. I'm certain I am repetitive, but if someone asks the question, so I guess it's no worse than, afilu elef pa'omim. The Mechaber in Shulchan Aruch brings that there's a machlokes, the Rosh and the Rashba, whether one kehillah could accept the Mesora of another kehillah. And the Shach says that there's no machlokes. And to understand the machlokes between the Mechaber and the Shach, you have to be medagdik very, very carefully. I'll try to be mekatzer as much as is humanly possible for myself. If it's clear that one kehillah has a Mesora that this oif is not acceptable, then there's no sofik sheba oilam. They're not allowed to accept the Mesora of another kehillah, because there may be some very telling and pressing reason why they have a Mesora that a certain min is not acceptable. And we know of many different possibilities. There are machloikis hapoiskim. There are all kinds of reasons why a Mesora may not be acceptable in a certain kehillah because they held al pi halacha it's not acceptable, they rejected the Mesora. It could be because of migdar milsa. It could be because the other kehillah that did accept the Mesora held like shitas and rishonim that are different than the shitas that this kehillah follows. Okay? The shita in Shulchan Aruch is even the mechaber, and there are more both subscribe to a shita that's machmir, and there is another shita in Rishonim which is mekil. I'm not going to go into the pratim. It's useless, you know. You rattle off a bunch of pratim, and most of the people sitting and listening could have the same impression as when they're listening to the Pita Maktoiris, and so on. I'm not going to help anyone just by telling him this one says this and this one says that. So that's
my question.
Yeah, let me just complete the statement. If the kehillah that has no Mesora is clear as to the reason that why does it have no Mesora, it's simply because there was no one available till now. It's a fledgling kehillah, and they're newcomers, and they never learned, and they never heard, and they never interested themselves, and they never had any source of knowledge, and they're willing now to learn and to accept, then they could follow the Mesora of other kehillas. That's also clear. The problem arises in a very special case, and I want to tell you, Rabbi Isai, that very special case is about 99% of all the cases. The problem arises as to when we don't know what's the reason for not having a Mesora. Is it because of Migdar Milsa and because of a negative reason? We were told that Al Pidin, our Chachomim decided against this Mesora, or is it because of ignorance? And the Shach says that that's how it seems from Poshup Pshat that you could assume that it's because of ignorance, and the Kehillah without the Mesora could accept from the Kehillah with the Mesora. On the other hand, the Mechaber and the Shach, by the way, recognizes that the Mechaber differs with him, and the bulk of the Loshan in the Shach follows and the Shita of the Mechaber. It's not a Shita that he dismisses and says to disregard. Many times it's so, but not in this case. And the Shach, the Mechaber, says that we have to be machmir and we have to assume that the Kehillah without the Mesora, unless we know differently, has a reason for not accepting that Mesora. And this led to all kinds of problems throughout the Doiras. We know that many poiskim answered pheasants, and they said there's no Mesora for pheasants. There are Kehillas which have a Mesora for pheasants, but we know clear that there were Kehillas that have no Mesora for pheasants. The Prima Godim says so. The Feirish, Moshe Feinstein brings it, and many others, that many tshuvas like that. And that's a case where following the Minig HaOlam to go according to the Mechaber, we would have to not follow that Mesora. So these are the guidelines, Rabbi say. These are the guidelines. We would love to really be able to be toyim all the minim that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Toyosa HaKadosh was matter for us. And we would love to have some tzayad who's boki and all the Chof Daladoifis come to us, maybe Tchias HaMesim will bring that to us, I'm sure, and tell us this is muter and this is osir, and then we'd be able to toyim the delicious sweet tam of Chagovim Tahorim, which the people who eat them tell us is very, very satisfying. But we have no Mesora, and I know that you could spend a lot of time being mefalpel in it, but it's these limitations that I just said that makes it very difficult for us to expand the present Mesora that we have. Yeah.
Rav, was any part of the Gidanosh removed today I've learned and read and heard that the Gid Hanasha is the sciatic nerve which runs down the leg. And I saw the Rav Ashkenazi taking out parts of meat from the ribs, and I saw a vessel being removed from the tongue, but I didn't observe any nerve being removed from the lower leg. Can you kindly tell us which part of the demonstration?
You're absolutely right.
Was removed?
Right. It would have been very nice to see the Gid Hanosha removed from the leg, but there was no leg, right? So, you know, sometimes there's raglayim ledover, and sometimes there's no raglayim. So we had no leg. It happens to be those who, maybe some of you were in Far Rockaway a couple of weeks ago, someone brought an entire calf and for demonstration purposes, and I came down there, and they called me on the way there, you might as well turn back because the calf was gutted from head to foot. There was nothing left from the internal organs. There's nothing to show. So I came there and I showed the Gid Hanoshe, all the parts that we spoke about before, but you must have a leg, a thigh, a complete thigh bone to show the Gid Hanoshe. Otherwise, we can't show the Gid Hanoshe in the rib cage where there's no Gid Hanoshe. Yeah.
With regard to the Nikah HaCharayim, are you concerned at all that the skills of the Nikah might be lost if it's not practiced in the United States commonly? And second, if it's not practiced in the United States commonly because of commercial reasons, does the salad of tonight's dinner indicate that there is in fact a market for very expensive kosher meat?
No, it's not. There's no danger of losing the Mesora, as far as I know, because there are still people who are training for the Nikah of the Gid Hanoshe. But it's possible, Reb Tzvi, I think, would be aware of that there is a decline in people who are interested in training in anything, Rabbi Isai, by the way, because you can't remove the Gid Hanoshe with a computer, and most people just want to do things with computers today. So it's that with laser beams, yeah, that's one of the problems. But there is the removal of the Gid Hanoshe from the Achirayim of deer, which is being done on a constant basis, but the special skills that are needed to remove it from the muscles of the behemoth, as I described before, the long training that Rav Ashkenazi described from 2 o'clock in the morning till dawn, when he was training through the night and learning how to remove it from the inside of the cuts of meat without entirely destroying the cut of meat. Those special skills are still being learned, but yes, the questioner is partially right. They're not as popular as they should, and not for the reason that there's no market for it, but for the reason that people just don't want to get their hands dirty lately. Yeah.
I know in Eretz Yisrael, often Hechsherim don't just take into account the is it kosher or not, but also other aspects of the establishment, sneers levels, and so on. With the OU Hechsher for meat products, would ever take into account factors of Tzar Balei Chaim or preventable Tzar Balei Chaim on the farming establishment?
Tzar Balei Chaim is, of course, a concern of the OU because it's a mitzvah in the Torah. We paskin Tzar Balei Chaim as deraisa, and Prika is bechina medina v'schar. We paskin Tzar Balei Chaim is a nisser, and a chiyuv to be nisser in it. The OU had a policy going back for many, many years that they didn't take animals that were geschochten while they were shackled and hoisted, because there were some people who felt, although it was never proved decisively, but they felt personally convinced that the shackling and hoisting was more painful to the animal than the putting it in a pen and a U-bar under its neck. I'm not entirely convinced that it's really that painful. I've observed shackling and hoisting by other hashgachas dozens of times, and I've not seen the grimacing in the face of the animal. I've seen it much more consistently in the other forms of restraint. But it was the OU policy for many, many years not to allow this, all because of Tzar Balei Chaim. And naturally, there are many things what we do to prevent Tzar Ba'alei Chayim. We make sure that the animal that's alive doesn't see another animal being geschochten or hanging in the air with its throat slit, because that causes Tzar Ba'alei Chayim. If anybody sees an animal, when it looks at its fellow creature with its throat slit, you really see pain on the face of the animal, much more than for those few seconds that it's hanging in the air. And all these things, there's a very big concern not to allow. Lately, there's been a recurrence of the problem of Tzar Ba'alei Chayim because a lot of the shechita is being done in South America, and in South America, the policies, the legal policies, the government policies, and the economic conditions make it so that we really can't put the pens and the things that we consider ideal into practice. You know, it would be a waste of time again for me to explain why it's so, but that's the metzius. So we're going to have to sit down and work things out and try to come up with ways to protect Tzar Ba'alei Chayim in places where we have almost no ability to influence. Yeah.
Since we have to go, many of us have to go home, and others of us have to go to Levana, we're going to have 3 more questions.
Yeah.
Kvod Rav, 2 or 3 issues regarding to the Mesora of Ofot.
Yeah.
First of all, the Machaber, before the sif that the Rav mentioned, talks about an individual that goes to a town or comes from a town.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And the Machaber there, with no machloket of any of the Mefarshim,
Right.
seems to indicate that an individual could go
Yes.
to a town.
And he could eat from that Mesora, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no shaila about it.
No shaila about that. And what something that I don't understand about the opinion of the OU, for example, the quail, which the OU has shefted over the years on and off.
Yeah.
The quail is based upon the Mesora of 1 person or 2 people. Why doesn't the OU have the same concern of accepting a Mesora?
There are 2 things. First, you mentioned about an individual going to a town. Again, no one ever doubted that the Mesora of a mokim in that mokim is acceptable. There's been no question and no doubt about that. And therefore, since it's a kosher accepted hanhoga in that mokim, so whoever is part of that mokim, and even a visitor to that mokim, because that's what the Rishonim tell us, they could eat from the meat in that mokim. The Mesora of the mokim is impeccable and indisputable. So we can't say that the person who goes to that mokim is meshubah to be machmir because he comes from a different mokim. Yes, in minhagim there is such a concept of chumrei hamokim sheyotze misham and chumrei hamokim she'olach misham, but because of the different sveikas connected with it, the poskim say that's we're not machmir in chumrei hamokim sheyotze misham by an individual who goes to a town. The mokim is koveya, the minig for the individual, differently than with other minhagim because of reasons I mentioned, and it's all there in Shulchan Aruch and the Noisei Kelim. That's one. Now we'll go to the second concern about quail. What's the difference between quail and others? As far as our information that was gathered for years and years is that quail was universally accepted throughout Europe. It's true that there were a certain number of individuals who told us, but the individuals are Eidim. They're not telling us that I have a Mesora and therefore it should be Kaveya, your Mesora. They were telling us that everyone had this Mesora. That's the individual. And Eid Echad Nemen B'Sura, if we have one qualified Eid who will tell us that there's a Mesora in 100 places, all over, it's universally accepted, why, that's good enough. We don't need more than that. So we have a Mesora on quail which is from all the Mekaimas, and we are goyle those Mekaimas. All of us come originally from the many Mekaimas in Europe, and there's Sfardim who come from other parts, and wherever it is, these are ancient Kehillas, and in all the ancient Kehillas, it seems that quail was accepted. We don't have to have 10 people telling us that. We have an Eid Echad in Snem and Bisurin. We have more than one Eid. We have many Eidim. But even if there was one, the problem arises when in certain Kehillas there was a Mesora and certain Kehillas there was not a Mesora. And then we have to say, let's accept in the Kehillah where there was not a Mesora, and let's transfer the Mesora of the Kehillah that there was a Mesora, that's where we run into trouble, because we have this Machloikis Rishonim according to the Mechaber, the Rosh and the Rashba, and according to the Shach, he learns a little differently, and that's where we have the trouble. If someone would come and tell us that I'm made, that all throughout Europe they ate a certain particular bird, and in the Sephardi places as well, and he's a Nishnemon, we wouldn't say we don't believe you because you're from a different Kehillah and you have no Nemonas by us. There's no such thing. Erlich Yid could come from a different Kehillah and he's an acceptable Eid Echad. Eid Echad Ne'emen B'Surah. If his Eidus is that throughout the countries and the Mekaymas that we come from, this was an acceptable Messiah, is fine. Tavay Olav Bercha, we would have absolutely no, even if we didn't know about it, but this last living aid would come and say they did it in Schnippeshok and they did it in Hotzenplatz and Budapest and so on and so forth. In Oberland and Unterland, in Mittelland, we would have no problem. We would have a Messiah that's widespread enough, and we wouldn't start saying maybe in your little village you came from some hill or mountain which is not in those countries. We have to have a widespread web of acceptability, which in certain cases, like at quail, we are able to achieve, and in the other cases, we're just not able to achieve.
One final question. How does the OU accept the Mesora, or lack of Mesora, on the Peking duck, which is the duck that shechted that comes from Asia?
I really can't answer that question. I know that there were Yidden who said that the Peking duck is really the same species as the mallard duck. It's the common duck, the regular white duck. I tried very much to discover whether the duck is called the Peking duck because it came from China, and others say that it's called Peking duck for other reasons. It's not Peking, it's Pekin or something like that. And the G at the end is not, today they say Beijing, so there's no Peking anymore around. Vatal Peking. I really don't know. I'll tell you, I know that it's commonly accepted, and it's considered as a universal Mesora. And, there are problems. We have Barry, who's sitting over here, Dr. Ari, wrote a beautiful kuntris explaining the reasons why we accept the Mesora on Turkey, and I told him I believe I have a time which I feel is even more choshev, but I'm not going to try to chaper in the last word. I'm not here for that purpose to outdo anyone. It's just that maybe the Peking duck is similar to that category, but what I understand is that it's considered a common duck, which is the duck of universally accepted duck. I can't tell you any more than that, really. I just would have to, invent swear on the spot if I were to tell you more than that. Yeah.
Two brief questions of clarification. I know the word gid is used in connection with nerves, also in connection with veins and arteries. Is the gid hanasha truly a nerve, or is it a vein?
Yeah, the gid hanasha, the gid is used in connection with more things than that. The Achilles tendon is the gid that we make all our chutim that we tie for tefillin and sifrei Torah. They're made from a tendon, the Achilles tendon. A gid is anything that's long and narrow, right? The male organ is called the gid ha'ama. The anything that's long and narrow is called the gid. The word gid, by the way, means to be moishech, to draw something. Good or yogud. Oyatot timshoich oyani emshoich. Yes, I saw that. That's the word gid. It comes from that shorish. Nerves, arteries, veins, tendons, and other things are also called gidin. Gidin, but your question was whether the gid hanosh is a nerve. Yes, the gid hanosh is a sciatic nerve. Absolutely, there's no tzad sofik sheba oilam. There could be sveikos in certain parts, whether the roots of the gid hanosh are exactly like whatever it is. and I'm not going to attempt to start a lengthy discussion on the Anosha now, but it's all absolutely nerves. There's no sad suffix sheba oilam. That's all it is.
And then, could I ask for a little bit of clarification on where family minhag comes into play? We've talked about minhag makom. What about if you have minhag in a family? How important is that?
Yeah, there is a chashivas to family minhagim, but in the lengthy and classical tshuva of the Chavas Yor, where he goes into the inyonim of minhagim, he's kaveya that the most important source for minhag is the minhag hamokim, but there are minhagim that are accepted by mishpachas. The Gemara text talks about it in Mokum Shanogu. The Gemara tells about the people, the Soichrim in Soyer and Sidon, who were makabel on themselves a chumrah not to go to not to travel on Erev Shabbos, even a short trip, which al pidin is mutter, but they were machmer on themselves. And the Gemara says that the Chazal told the children who were poorer and were unable to keep up the minig, they said that they're mechuyev because it's a minig mishpacha. There is definitely a chashivas to a minig mishpacha, but the prime source of minig, yes, what is it? Uh-huh. Whitefield originally was raised in the most horrible circumstances, terrible tzar balei chayim. People weren't aware of it, but the ventilation was asphyxiating. The food, everything about it was terrible. The government clamped down on it and put a tremendous control. I was there in the veal barns, like they called them, in Ohio, after the new policies were instituted, and it's not that terrible. There is a certain amount of movement, and there's more room. The ventilation is very carefully supervised. The food is more tasty. The truth is, if people wouldn't have a yetzer hara for that soft and tender white meat, and there wouldn't be a major market for it, nobody would include this into the kosher diet. But you'll have to educate people in an area where Moshe Rabbeinu was unsuccessful. When they came and they said, "Etano lonu bosar v'noichelo," and he told them, "What's the matter with you? You have mon vos feltois bosar," and they had mikne, that the mikne rav hoyel of negodam neruven, and Afal became, it was he came saying to the Rebbeinu Shalom, "Me'ayin li bosar," losses l'chol ha'mazeh, and it was a major problem. So there is a big demand for bosar. I said the other day, somebody at my table, one of the kids screamed out, "I want pickles." So nobody got up and got pickles. So I told somebody there that let's go and immediately get pickles. They said, "Why?" So I told them, because there was someone who had a major problem when he forgot pickles, that people came tining Zacharnu es Akishuim, So as long as there are people who demand to be satisfied and want their stomachs filled with all kinds of luxurious foods, you're not going to stop but what you could do is control it and try to improve it. There was a fantastic improvement from the way it was originally done till the way it's being done now.
This is actually not my question. It's coming from the Ezras Nashim. And the question posed is there anything al pi halacha that's objectionable to cows being fed a diet of ground beef or ground animal parts?
There's nothing al pi din that's objectionable to cannibalism among cows. But what we find is that this diet is definitely something that is suspect l'chol hapachas of conveying the mad cow disease, this horrible, fatal disease. And it seems that it's the opinion of of the experts that by stopping and to feed the cows with this type of food, it'll definitely limit, if not entirely eliminate, the cases of mad cow disease. The minig hamokim, by the way, and this mokim, I guess, has to follow Rabbi Schoenfeld, who's the Rav hamokim over here, the next block. So I guess it fits in with what we spoke about before. Mokim. Yeah.
Rosh Yeshua from Belsky.